Hello and welcome back to David Does What He Wants. Today I will be showing you how to paint this scratch-built Panzer IV. As you can see, it is made out of some cheap cardstock, some index cards, a little bit of foam, and a lot of ingenuity. We're painting it in a German paint scheme that can be used for anywhere from Italy all the way through Normandy and even up until the end of days of the war. We will begin with Tamiya dark yellow, give it a good shake, and we're just going to slather this all over the tank. Don't need to prime it, paint will sink perfectly well into the Panzer's chassis. I'm just going to get it in there. I'm going to get a big glop of it. You make it too watery and the green finish will show through, and that's not something that we want to have happening. Make sure to get it in all the crevices and recesses. A little bit about this tank, first the build process, then the tank itself. I made this tank out of blueprints I got off online. And in a future video, I will be showing you specifically how to scratch build vehicles like this. Nevertheless, I made it out of hot glue and several other items. Used hot glue to stick it together, sprues, random bits, of course, enhanced the overall detail of the tank. As you can see, Tamiya paint has a habit of washing out and drying up really quickly, so you need to keep it wet a little bit. Keeping it perfectly thin can be hard, as you can see on the shirtsin. It is applied slightly too thin for its own good, but we will cover that up with extra layers. And in addition, we will also be applying camouflage over the top of it. About the Panzer IV itself, this is a Panzer IV-H. It had around 80 millimeters of frontal armor, which was more than most Shermans could handle. The Sherman, of course, was the main American tank. It was about equal to the T-34-85. It was armed with a 75 millimeter high-velocity gun, similar to the PaK-40 German anti-tank gun in terms of performance. It was armed with an MG-34 in the turret, an MG-34 in the hull, and several other machine guns that could be pintail mounted. As for camo, you can see the base coats are done. There's still some spots that I'll have to touch up here and there, but that shouldn't be too much of a difficulty, especially with a smaller size paintbrush. We've also put the turret back on for this step, but we'll be taking off shortly. We'll start with XF61 dark green from Tamiya. We're going to use a dry brush to apply this, and we're going to stipple it on. Give your paint a good shake. As always, make sure it's well mixed. Otherwise, it won't apply very well, and you'll have a spotty finish. There's a dry brush I was talking about. This is actually a makeup brush that I've repurposed for paint. You want to take the turret off to begin with. I like to experiment with my turrets, and I'm just going to stipple it on to try to get that half soft edge, half hint of high turning finish on the turret. You can see there that it applies really nicely, giving a soft edge and also breaking up the pattern of the tank. The German crews, this was one of the colors they would have been issued when sent to the front, in addition to Rotsbraun or Red-Brown, Dunkelgelb, and several other colors depending on the time of year. Make sure to get in some of the recesses and try to use it to cover up any mistakes in the first painting stage. Apply it on thick, and don't forget the cupolas. German tank crews would often paint those. Now here on the shirtsin, we want to make some wider blotches to break up both the pattern of the tank more and add some more interest to what is otherwise a dull and flat area. Make sure to get it in between the shirtsin. That's an area that I often see forgotten, but definitely was not, as when your shirtsin is blown off, you do not want to have an uncamouflaged tank chassis revealed. Get it in all the cracks and recesses. Don't worry about getting it perfectly under the hot glue. You can fix that up with base coats, weathering, whatever you want to do. Anyway, back to the Panzer IV. It was crewed by a crew of 5. The 5 men were a loader, a gunner, a commander, a driver, and a radio operator who would also fire the hull machine gun. This was the main German workhorse for the Wehrmacht from 1943 through 1945, the Panzer IV-H specifically. Make sure you get the bogies well on a side note. This tank's performance was 24 miles per hour, approximately on-road. Off-road slowed to about 17 to 18, depending on the source you read. And here we go into unit markings. Now, I want to give this generic markings that can be used any campaign anywhere. Sicily, Italy, Kursk, all the way to the final days in the gates of Berlin. As you can also see, I applied Rotsbrown to the sides to give it a much more varied pattern. I'm pointing out some areas with the paintbrushes you might have noticed, and that's where we're going to put the Balkan crosses. Now, I will be hand painting these, as decals do not apply well to the cardstock that I've chosen to use. This is just bulk paint from Target, black paint. I find it works really well, washes, just applies better than most paints, and it's way cheaper. Take the lid off, grab a smaller brush. Here I'm using a size 1. Get tip wet because you're definitely going to need some good paintbrush skills here. And you're just going to start by drawing a cross on the side. Now, the Germans applied the crosses in several different places with the shirts, and sometimes they wouldn't even apply them at all, sometimes on the turrets. But here, I'm going for a general side view. And as you can see, the first one will likely be a little bit more rusty than the other ones, but that's to be expected. You do not have to hand paint your crosses. You can try water slide decals, but generally the water tends to soak in, and it doesn't tend to work well on scratch-built surfaces, especially with the cardstock. One way around this is by using plastic stock, strawberry container lids, etc., but I do not recommend it. So make sure your Balkan cross is completely even. And when you encounter globs of hot glue, as I did here, you can just paint right over it, or you can choose to stop at the glob and instead cover it up with foliage for additional camouflage. The Scherzen was generally 8mm thick, thinking that because I'm painting crosses on it, we should talk about it. Now, some people tell you it's designed to stop heat rounds. This is not true. The Scherzen was designed to stop the Russian 14mm anti-tank round fired by the PTRD rifle. This round was very effective at penetrating the side armor of the tank. You'll notice that I'm painting the barrel. This was something that tank aces will sometimes do, and you'll notice that I'll add a white stripe on it later. Anyway, the Scherzen was first invented just before the Kursk attack and was used to great effect there. It did have a slight effect on bazookas and that kind of stuff. However, if it was put in too close, it would actually amplify the blast effect. YouTuber Cone of Arc makes a video on his shirts and that I found was very enlightening. It was constructed from aluminum, mild steel, or whatever they could find initially. Sometimes they would use mesh, which was very effective at stopping both the Soviet anti-tank grenades and the PTRD rifles. Sometimes these late model Panzer IVs were given Zimmermann coating, which was meant to stop German magnetic mines, and did have a positive effect against heat shells. However, this one does not have it, as the Germans really stopped using it in the 1944 era, because they realized that magnetic mines were not a threat, but rather the higher velocity Allied anti-tank guns. Here I'm getting out Vallejo white paint, just good white paint, and I already have some that's overflowed from the bottle cap into the turret, so I will just be using that with a slightly wetted paintbrush, of course. Get just on the tip of your paintbrush, and we're going to start by applying unit markings. To begin with, you'll notice that I will apply the unit number as 7, and you'll see me paint that here. That means that it's part of the 7th company. The next number is 1. That means that it's from the 1st platoon, and that means it's the 3rd tank. Now, oftentimes there were not 7th companies. However, in special cases, especially Special Panzerabteilungs or other elite German formations, they would convert and add 2 battalions of tanks together to give them 7 companies. Or they would record their companies from one regiment as all being in the same regiment instead of the battalion structure. If this was a battalion command tank, you would see it say 0 and then whatever number in the battalion command it was. I just painted 1 white stripe on to signify 1 potential kill for this crew in this tank. Now to the Balkan cross. What you want to do here is paint slightly outside of the lines of the cross. The inner black cross is going to be slightly overshrouded by the white part, and so you want to make sure that the white part is properly displayed. Now, hand painting is something that takes a lot of steadiness and a lot of work and finesse at. I might or might not tidy up some of the bits depending how lazy I feel. But it definitely takes time to perfect, and to begin with, I would practice edge highlighting and that kind of stuff on figures, or perhaps tanks. Weathering's another great way to get specific feeling for hand painting before you just dive in. So if you're diving in and expecting decal level results, don't. Another good solution is to print Balkan crosses or whatever emblem you need on a printer, and then just cut them out using a pair of scissors and just using white glue or super glue to attach it. Though I would warn you that super glue chews through most styrofoam very quickly, so if you're using styrofoam parts, I would not recommend using super glue. Alright, we're going to want to get the brush entirely washed out. Sometimes a part I don't often show, but still as important. Attach the turret, and we are ready to move on to the metallic details. Alright, for metallic details, we want to start by painting the treads, machine gun, and doing a little bit of weathering on the barrel and the exhaust pipe on the back. As for the treads, I made them out of just purple construction paper. Not the smartest decision, but I ran out of cardstock, as at the end of the year I normally resupply my hobby stuff, and this year I'm doing a massive expansion campaign for my 1/72nd scale armies. Side note, this tank is in 1/72nd scale for those of you who are wondering how big it was. 20 millimeters, another way of expressing it. To me, metallics are interesting because they often have a tendency to get really thin on top and glop up on the bottom, so be sure to mix them up well in addition to shaking them. And for the treads, I don't intend on any tanks flipping over. As you can see, the bottom is hollow. I'll probably add a floor onto that later, but that's usually the last step I like to do. Make sure you get all the tread, and don't forget about the little part that might be showing on the insides of your shirts in. I did give this tank treads that would be the size of Winterkretten or the German standard winter track, which was meant to give a tank better ground displacement over muddy grounds, snow, soft ground, marshes, etc. These were introduced starting in 1942, I think. In summary, there you've just painted your first Panzer IV-H, or maybe your third, or maybe your 100th. I don't know. Beautiful tank, though. I'll make some videos shortly to tell you how to scratch build. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.